Welcome to Could Be Pretty Cool News, the podcast where we dive into the exciting world of creative entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Casey, and together we'll embark on a journey to explore this dynamic ecosystem from multiple angles, including academia, research and data, community building, and compelling personal narratives from creative entrepreneurs themselves. Get ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered as we uncover the stories and strategies behind building successful creative ventures. It's time to discover why the world of creative entrepreneurship could be pretty cool. Today on Could Be Pretty Cool News, we're talking about something that can make many creators squirm: money. While we pour our hearts out into the creative process, conversations about finances can oftentimes feel uncomfortable or even taboo in artistic spaces. Our first guest, Asia, brings a unique perspective to this conversation. With degrees in both accounting and finance, she's undertaken an unexpected journey from traditional financial success to helping artists and creators redefine what wealth really means. Her story challenges the starving artist narrative and offers fresh insights into how creators can build sustainable careers while staying true to their artistic vision.
So we have a special guest with us today. Asia is going to talk to us a little bit about something that we don't often talk about here on Could Be Pretty Cool News, and that is finances as it relates to artists, independent creators, but it's definitely something that we should all probably be talking about a lot more. And so, Asia, I would love it if you could introduce yourself.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. So, about myself, I'm originally from Austin, Texas, moved to Atlanta, Georgia in 2015. And so, to make it relevant, my background, to make it relevant for what we're talking about here today, I'll tell you that I grew up in a household with a single mom, and she had two kids, me and my sister. And as a single mom, the programming that I grew up with hearing from her was that we didn't have enough money, that there was always going to be bills to pay, and that everybody else could enjoy life because they had money and we didn't. That's what I heard growing up. And so with that, I learned that I started to hoard money. And so my mom saw me what she looked like a good saver. So she told me, "Oh, Asia, you're so good with money. You should go to school for money and get the good job because that'll save you from struggling like we do." So that's exactly what I did. I got a bachelor's in accounting and I got a master's in finance. And so after graduating with those two degrees in 2014, I moved to Atlanta. And so I just wanted to share that part about it because, like you said, we're going to get into it talking about the creative side and how our culture thinks about making money on the creative side. But I just kind of wanted to start with that to let you know the programming that I grew up with. In 2015, when I moved to Atlanta, I had the degrees, I got the good job, and I even bought my house that next year. And so on paper, I was financially successful, one would say. And it was Achilles tendon injury in 2017 that made me realize that being financially successful on paper wasn't enough to actually reach my goals. And so that was the catalyst point, if you will, that made me realize that programming I just described. As you can imagine, this is all in hindsight that I could share it with you in this way.
That's like incredible. I can certainly say for myself, graduating from college with a music degree, a theater minor, going to grad school for an MFA, having a background in finance and having a comfort level and knowledge about money is not something that I had. Speaking of looking at hindsight, and so I'm curious to know for you, like for someone who is right now an independent artist, a creator, and didn't come from a background of knowing about money and finances, do you have any like words of wisdom or how did you develop a confident relationship with money?
So I'm glad you pointed the question that way by identifying that background in finance and then speaking about the words that I have to share now. because in 2017, that catalyst moment with the Achilles injury, the question that I asked myself that sent me on this journey to learning about quantum wealth, which ultimately is the all that I've learned about money is not what I learned in school. So in 2017, I realized that what I learned in school was just about business finance. They didn't teach me about personal finance, which is ultimately all about behavioral psychology and neuroscience in terms of how we think and behave and what drives that behavior, which is subconscious beliefs. So if I can put it right now, wrap it up in a bow to say the words of wisdom is number one, realizing that every person is unique. And so when you talk about financial success, when we talk about the programming around that, they call that the American dream. And our society as a whole has been programmed to think that this American dream is what financial success looks like and what you should strive for. That's just what our society has been programmed with. And so when you talk about the creatives, in 2017 was shortly after I moved to Atlanta, I looked around me and I saw a bunch of creatives and people who were making their way and living their life without having to have that 9 to 5 job. So that was something that allowed me to see another way other than what I was taught in schools. And to bring it together, the words of wisdom is because we're all individual, you can be confident that your version of success may not look like everybody else's version of success. And so if we can move forward with that, then we don't have to compare to our parents who are telling us, oh, get the good job, stay in school. You don't want to struggle or have to be a starving artist. When you realize that what you decide is successful to you, you may not always need money to achieve that lifestyle. And so the point is here just to be open minded and creative and realize that the programming our society has, in my opinion, is very much backwards in terms of what people are actually striving for when they're looking for wealth and success.
So let's continue talking about that for a moment. You mentioned the notion of the starving artist, and you mentioned something about like mindset having
Mm,
a lot to do with one's perception of financial success. And once again, I'm sure that there are a lot of artists and creatives listening to this who have been in positions where someone is offering them a gig and the fee is pretty low, but it's like, I should probably not
mm,
tell this person no. Or maybe they're being asked to do something for free because it'll be a great portfolio piece and great exposure. And I know that
mm.
there's kind of like there's some trade-offs, especially when you're first starting out. But could you talk to me a little bit more about this sort of mindset piece when it comes to building financial success, and specifically for creators? How can creators start to develop a mindset of feeling like they deserve to build that success, whatever it looks like for them?
Absolutely. Okay, so first of all, I would like to make a distinction between fiat dollars and when people say wealth. When I say wealth, I'm not talking about money in the bank because when I speak of wealth, there's this concept in the quantum wealth theory. I call it the North Star vision. And the North Star vision is basically you painting what your ideal lifestyle, what your ideal life would look like. And particularly, we're talking about 5 years into the future. So if you paint what your ideal lifestyle would look like, how would you like to wake up and spend your time each day, how you want to spend your mornings, what you want to do, who you want to spend it with. When you paint that picture of your life, then day to day, you can make sure that you're taking actions that are leading you toward that picture. It's a very clear picture you painted. And so, to your example about the artists considering the gigs and what it would pay them, if they've painted that North Star vision clearly enough, and if they know ideally they want to be on stage singing and sharing their art, if that's what they want to do, then no dollar amount matters because they want that experience of doing it. And so, adding another point to that in the quantum wealth theory, quantum particularly, we are talking about quantum physics because when you start to focus on, they call it the observer effect. There was an experiment where make it short, the particles of energy started to behave different when they started to observe it closer. And so, similar to our life, because everything in the universe is made of energy, as are we, our thoughts, our energy, and behavior. So, when we start to observe and pay attention to what we want, we start to bring in more of that.
So let's talk about where we are today in the world of the creator economy. You
Mm,
mentioned when you first moved to Atlanta, meeting artists and creatives who weren't working a 9 to 5. They were able to find a way to make a living without sort of doing that traditional path. And one of the things that we highlight on this show is that, similar to what you said, there is no 100% right or wrong path for everyone. Some
mm,
creators are working 9 to 5 and doing their work as a side hustle. Some people are doing their work as a creative outlet from their job, but they don't actually mind their job.
mm.
And so for you, I want to know, do you have advice for anyone who may want to be on that path of like not having a 9 to 5, but they have to do the 9 to 5 right now just to maintain their lifestyle and their living?
Yeah, the advice I would give is the same advice I took myself when I was in that exact position. Is, if you know that 9 to 5 is gonna meet your basic needs financially, you gotta pay rent, you gotta eat food. If you can frame that in a way as it's allowing you to create your art, because when you talk about mindset, it sounds so flippant to just say how you feel about things is how they are. It sounds easy, but when you really think about this example here, if somebody is in a 9 to 5, and let's say they hate their job, they go in every single day, they wake up mad, they come home mad, and during the day, spending that energy that is feeling that way. And so when you get home, that energy that you spent hating your job, that energy is not going to allow you to create and to be happy when you create when you're not working. And so if you can find a way to align what you're doing, because one of the other concepts we talk about in the quantum wealth theory is brain heart coherence. The Heart Math Institute does a lot of studies about the power of the heart. They say it's like a mini brain because it also has neural pathways that can communicate and send information and receive it. And so when your brain is thinking one thing, like, oh, I want to be doing art, I'd rather be doing this, but your heart is feeling another way because you hate your job, that's being incoherent. So when your brain and heart are out of alignment, then you're wasting energy and wasting the fuel that you rather could be using to create more of what you want. And so my advice is, if even if you hate the job, at least reframe how you see it and appreciate it for what it's allowing you to do, which is to have a roof over your head and food on your table so you can create the art.
Wow, I think that's such a great point. Particularly, there's so many, especially like on social media, like we're seeing people who have these millions and millions of followers and are getting all these brand deals and they're like they're having the best life. And it's like, oh my goodness, why do I still have to go to work, go
Mm,
to a job? That
hmm.
mentality kind of like not
Yeah.
serving a purpose, I think is
Mm,
definitely something that a lot of people go through for sure.
yes. And especially with social media and having that instant access view into other people's lives. There was that documentary, I think it's called The Social Proof, or it was some documentary just talking about the impacts of social media. And they were kind of focusing their discussions about the impacts on teenagers and kids. But for people my age, millennials, I'm 35 years old. I kind of came in right at the beginning of it, and I was already of age by the time social media got to us. And so I feel like we might not recognize the effects as adults as much as it has, because you can scroll and you see those influencers, you see everybody on vacation and all that. You may not realize the seeds it's sowing, even if, because you're talking about subconscious. There's a lot of subconscious things that are happening when we're on social media. And so in your head, you might like the picture because you support them and all that. But like you said, if you kind of have that feeling inside, like, why can't I do that? Then it's sowing a different seed than you thought it was by liking it.
And so I love how so much of your methods are tied to mindset. Like we hear a lot about mindset and mindfulness within the context of like wellness, but very
Mm.
rarely do we have conversations about that in terms of finances and in terms of money. And so I guess to close this out, is there any other wisdom or any other, just for the artists and the creators who are listening to this, who may be thinking it's hard to stay positive, it's hard to have a positive mentality when it comes to funds because it's real out here. Groceries cost a lot. What would maybe be some of your final words of wisdom for those folks?
Yes, and I appreciate you highlighting the mindset piece throughout because I feel like I'm so inundated in this work. I have been since 2017 that I sometimes forget to highlight that specific piece because when I told you I asked the question to send me on this journey. What are the wealthy 1% doing that everybody else is missing? That's the question I asked in 2017 when I was laid up in the bed with my cast from my Achilles tendon. My livelihood was threatened because I had to stay home from work for a month. So, the question, what are the wealthy 1% doing that everybody else is missing? It came down to three things. Two of them, I'm sure the audience has heard lots about if they've ever been in the money space because they're all over Instagram. It's the number one, business and tax strategy, because taxes are the number one expenses we as Americans pay. So learning how to operate a business to minimize the taxes, that's the number one strategy of the wealth. The number two is life insurance, understanding that life insurance is more than just death benefit, there are also living benefits to it. And there's plenty of information out there about that. But the third thing that I realized that the wealthy are doing that everybody else is missing was the mindset. And that's exactly why I wrote the quantum wealth theory. It's all about mindset. There's very little technical financial literacy in there because I realized it's the empowerment part is what was needed for somebody to even feel good about their financial situation in their life. It's not about how much money you have because we've seen plenty of those millionaires who got rich and went broke, went bankrupt for whatever reason. It's not about the money. It's the mindset you have and feeling empowered with everything you're doing so that you can experience the life that you want. It doesn't matter about the green papers. It matters the feeling and the experience you have. And so my last final words is just all about that mindset and empowerment. And if you can find a way to empower yourself to just feel better, even if you're not financially where you are, you know you're getting there, then you can enjoy your day and not let the situation bring you down ultimately.
Nice. Fantastic. So let's see. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish that I would have asked you?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I don't think there's nothing you didn't ask, but if I can add one more piece to what I'm sharing. And so I mentioned the neuroscience with how we behave and the things that drive us to act in the ways we do. When you mentioned for the artist who wants to have more of the experience that they desire and attract more of that, there's a piece called the reticular activating system in our brain. If you've ever heard like the examples, as soon as you start researching a red Volkswagen Beetle, all of a sudden you start seeing red Volkswagen Beetles all around you. That's because your reticular activating system, whatever you program it with, it's designed to go out and find more of that you've programmed it with. And so, again, in this money conversation, if you can paint your North Star vision and know what the lifestyle that you're desiring, if you can paint that clear enough, you could program your reticular activating system with it, and then it'll start to attract and send you in the directions that will allow you to experience more of that. And so, that's just my way of just anchoring it in to where it's really about what you're feeding yourself and programming yourself with to believe and feel day to day that'll allow you to feel like you're either successful financially or not.
Next, we're exploring a fascinating niche in the creative world: graphic design for film and television. Our guest, Callan, shows how she went from designing high school newspaper spreads to creating the visual details that bring movie and TV worlds to life. Born to artistic parents and armed with formal design training, Callan found her way into the film industry almost by chance. Her story shows how creative careers often take unexpected turns, and sometimes those detours lead to exactly where we're meant to be.
My name is Callan Ramirez, and I live here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm working as a graphic designer in the film industry. So I grew up having very artistic parents. My mom has always been very interested in fashion and interior design, and she's always had a love for historic homes, historic architecture. And my dad has a background in illustration, airbrush illustration, and graphic design. And so, yeah, both my parents are very artistic people. And yeah, I've just always been surrounded by art and creativity. And it's just always been such a huge part of my life. But even with that, until high school, I didn't ever really think about graphic design as a profession, even though it's something that my dad pursued and still does to this day. But of course, throughout elementary school, middle school, high school especially, I was always a person that would do the creative part of school projects. Like everyone always said, Callan, that's what you're doing in this. And I, of course, was always someone that was interested in doing that part. So yeah, in high school, actually, I found myself in joining newspaper, and how I fell into that was I did an illustration for the center spread, and I don't remember exactly how that came to be, but that was my freshman year of high school. And after doing that illustration, mine was featured, and the newspaper, I guess I'll say team or class, approached me and was like, oh, are you interested in being a center spread editor for the newspaper? And I said, yeah, that sounds really fun. So from sophomore year up until senior year, I was a part of the newspaper at my high school, and I was a center spread editor all 3 years. And yeah, it was the most creative part of being a part of the newspaper team at my high school. And I started using Adobe InDesign. So that was my first real introduction into using the programs. So from then on, about until my senior year, I was thinking, I wanted to do a profession that really helped people. I was like, oh, maybe I could be a veterinarian, like maybe I could be a doctor or something. I wanted to help others. I've always had a passion for that. But it hit me one day. I had an epiphany. I was like, I should pursue graphic design. I really love the layout of the newspaper. I love creating the artistic features in the center spread. And I don't know, it just clicked for me. Graphic design, my dad does that. Like, why have I never thought about that before? So after that, I applied to a bunch of design schools, state schools. And long story short, I found myself going to a college in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I moved to go to college. And it was a private art school. So very, very small, like 500 to 700 people max. Yeah, and that is where I pursued just a general education of graphic design. And I had a very diverse education there. I had 2 different professors in the end who had very different perspectives. And it was overall a really great experience. Since then, I've just created such a passion for design. But specifically with film, that was never anything that I had considered. I'd never thought of that niche area of graphic design before. But at the university that I went to, the main pull for that college was the film program. So I made a lot of friends throughout the 4 years that I was there that were trying to pursue film in many different areas. So after college, most people there went on to pursue film, which in New Mexico, since going to college there and graduating, film has expanded there greatly. So a lot of people I'd say half about moved to LA, the other half stayed and tried to pursue film in New Mexico. And shortly after I graduated, I found myself at a nonprofit in Santa Fe and working as their in-house graphic designer. But unfortunately, that nonprofit fell apart within a year of me working. And while it was a great experience, I was looking for something else. That road kind of ended for me, and I really couldn't find much work in the graphic design realm there. But I had a friend working and starting out in the film industry who recommended I look into graphic design for film, because I guess there was a shortage there. There wasn't many graphic designers available. And it happened to be that there was a pilot in Albuquerque that desperately needed a graphic designer, and I got connected with them, and within an hour of sending an email, I got a response like, hey, like, can you come in tomorrow for an interview? And the rest is really just history. I was so absolutely terrified because I just really knew, other than what the little bits and pieces I picked up from being at that college, I really didn't know much about film. I never took a film class. That was really never something that was offered to me. Even though some of the classes did seem really cool, that just like was not a part of my program at all. But I went the next day and I interviewed, and they knew I wasn't familiar with film, especially design for film. But I had about a year's experience of design, and they liked the work that I had done so far in my portfolio. So they decided to take a chance on me, and I worked on that pilot for about 6 or 7 weeks. And yeah, it was such a journey. I'm forever grateful to that art director who took me under his wing, and he really gave me a chance. He took me on set and he pointed out to me, oh, this guy is doing this. This group of people is responsible for this job. And it was really amazing. And he was also able to pick up the slack, I guess we'll say, for where I just wasn't completely wrapping my head around all the responsibilities I had as a graphic designer on a show. But both being a pilot, I will say there was a sense of it being a little less pressure because just one episode and we had a couple of weeks to work on it. So the stakes weren't incredibly high. So I think maybe that kind of played a role into them taking a chance on me. If it had been a full season, it would have been a lot different. But yeah, since then, it's just I've been pursuing that. After that show, I reached out to all the local art directors, maybe production designers, art department coordinators, just anybody that I felt like I could get some kind of connection to. And I just put myself out there. I said, hey, I just finished up this pilot. Here's my portfolio from the show. Yeah, if you have any leads on any jobs, let me know. And finally, I think a couple of people actually responded to me and just said, hey, nice to meet you, keep you in mind. And I can't remember, maybe like a month later, an art director reached out to me and was like, hey, I'm jumping on this Netflix movie. Are you interested in being a graphic designer on this show? And I said, yes. Yeah, so I just kept the ball rolling. I believe I worked in New Mexico as a graphic designer in film for about 4 years. I worked on a handful of things and it was a really great experience. And then up until about almost 2 years ago, I moved here to Atlanta to continually pursue film. And I've worked on a couple shows since then here. And it's a much bigger pool. When I took a risk by leaving, I don't want to say leaving behind my connections, because as I've gotten further into the industry, notice how everybody is connected. Like, oh, wow, I didn't know you worked with this person, or it's smaller than you think, even though it is a large industry. But I used the connections I had in New Mexico to make connections in Atlanta, and it really played out well. But it just took a lot of putting myself out there and taking a lot of risk and just trusting the process. So first, I'll say one aspect that I love about graphic design is because there's just so many avenues of design that you can pursue. It's really endless. Like originally, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but I had this idea that I would graduate and maybe it would be an in-house designer like I was like at the nonprofit for a while. But my real goal was to work at like a design firm or something of that nature, where you're surrounded by a bunch of other graphic designers and you're working on several projects for just months and months, maybe years. I guess it depends on your client, but you're all working to complete this one goal of like, oh, we're, I don't know, branding this new cider for this company and they need a whole platform of like packaging and advertising and colorways and patterns. And that's just kind of what I envisioned for myself. I've always loved what encompasses branding, which I think is when someone thinks of designer, they probably think of like branding and logos and advertisements, probably as number one. But I will say with film, like it absolutely encompasses that. But what makes it so different is the fast-paced nature of it and how quickly you kind of run through projects and you do it. Maybe this just depends on the show, but I feel confident in saying that you really just brush over the surface level of a lot of the projects because you don't have time to, I mean, you can't spend months and months on a project. I mean, you'll spend months and months on working on one show that maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a huge feature film in theaters, maybe it's a Netflix movie, maybe something a little bit smaller, like maybe it's a short episodic series, like 7 episodes, and you're creating graphic elements for all of that, for all the departments. But it's a lot different. And I give you a couple examples. So I was just working on a TV show, ended it last week. I was only on this job temporarily, but it's about, I believe, 18 episodes total. I worked on about 4. And when a script comes out, we're responsible for doing the graphics breakdown. So we'll read through it, and right off the bat, there's a restaurant scene. There's an exterior restaurant. You're panning in. It's like, okay, we need a name for this restaurant. Are there going to be advertisements in the window? Like, are there parking spaces outside that have a little like handicap stickers? Like, do we need to make covers for that? Like, do we see any street signs? Like, we need to think about that. Is there anything else in view on the outside that we need to consider? So that's something that the graphic designer is responsible for in their original breakdown before we have any meetings with anybody else. And that's always things that are kind of unsaid in the script, but we're just trained to anticipate them. Sometimes things are heavily featured and sometimes they completely brush over things, but we have to be prepared because we don't know offhand on the day of what the director is going to want to shoot. Like, we have a little bit of an idea, but we don't want to miss anything. So we have to think of all the possibilities. So yeah, we would make exterior signs for that location, maybe have to make posters and, as I mentioned, street signs. But there's an interior to that restaurant. We would have to think about, okay, like, we probably need to make some menus and business cards. And what about in the background of the counter? Like, there's probably a business license. There's probably, I don't know, kitchen signage maybe. Maybe there's menus on the wall behind them. Maybe there's maybe not so much anymore, but like a magazine rack, something like that. Just all these little details. And that's what I'm going to say is what I love the most about working as a graphic designer in this industry is all of those little details that you see that maybe you just pass over when you're watching a TV show or a movie, but all those little details add up into making this more realistic world. Because without them, it would feel kind of strange. Like, if you didn't have those small little details pulling the world together. Yeah, so that's kind of a brief overview of what we might make. But on this last show, I've realized more than I ever have of how much project management we do. It's a huge aspect of our job is, yes, we think about the graphics that we have to make, but we have to think about the timeline. We have to think about our relationship with all the vendors locally, like who makes the best 3-dimensional letters, like how fast can we get that? How much does it cost? When's the last second we can wait to get approval for our design before we have to bug maybe our director, production designer, or director even for approval so we can make sure this gets printed and is in hand on set to install before the day that we shoot. Like, there is just such a huge process that we have to consider every time, we're presented with a new script or a new set that pops up or anything. So it's huge. And I really enjoy that kind of responsibility, even though it can be very stressful. But I am a very organized person and I enjoy having those responsibilities. So yeah, it's a very good mix of project management and design. And there's no other profession that I can think of where you have this wide of a variety of design that I can get my hands on. And that's something that really makes me want to see how far my career in the industry can go. Because it's just, I love that fast-paced nature where you're not going to know what they're throwing at you, and just the experience of creating really unique design. I love it. So originally was starting this film career in New Mexico. When the first show I did, actually, I had enough hours to join the local 480 in New Mexico, which is the film union there. So I'm a part of the union. However, when I moved to Atlanta, I transferred my membership to the local 479 here, which is Georgia and Alabama combined. So a whole other rabbit hole we can go down about talking about unions and all that encompasses. But I will say I really enjoy being in a union because I know when I join a union show specifically, I know I'm going to be paid by a payroll company. I know I'm going to get my paycheck every Friday. And I know I have a very long list of rights. And if something goes wrong, like I can report it, which has never been an issue. But it's good to know that I'm backed by that union. And of course, comes with health insurance and retirement and all of those things. So that's really huge. And it makes me feel a lot more comfortable being a gig worker, knowing that I have that backing me. Yeah, so I will say I do wish I kept my union membership in New Mexico because I could have worked remotely doing New Mexico jobs here in Georgia. But, that's all right. I don't believe it's recommended to be a part of, I think, more than 3 unions at once. There's a lot encompassing union membership, and there are rules, lots of rules, but it makes me feel great to be backed by that. So it is a bit different than being a freelancer since I'm a part of the union, even though I do have a freelance business on the side. I have my own LLC to do non-film things, graphic design. I do a lot of graphic design for galleries in Albuquerque, New Mexico, actually. So when I'm not working on gigs, I'll make a lot of graphics for them whenever they need it, which is another good source of income for me and very fun design too. Yeah, so those are kind of my 2 main sources of income is my LLC freelance business and then working as a graphic designer in the 479 union here. I don't know if everyone's aware of what's been going on the past almost 2 years in the industry, but it's been very difficult for almost everybody because of the strikes that occurred with the writers and with the actors. And my union didn't end up going on strike, but it was this past July, our contract expired. So maybe I'll back up really quickly and say that every 4 years, my union and writers and actors, their contracts expire and we renegotiate, but that does put everyone up for the possibility of striking if we don't get what we ask for. So everything has worked out, but it has been a domino effect and it's really affected a lot of people, including myself. But I do think I've been lucky to find as much work as I have the past 2 years. And it's just, even though it's brought a lot of hardships, it won't always be this way. And I'm just passionate about it. Like, I really feel deeply that if I keep pursuing this and putting my best work out there, and it's going to be very rewarding. I mean, it's already been very rewarding. I've put my entire career into pursuing film, and it's not something that I'm going to give up on easily. And I do have this dream of being maybe not the graphic designer, but a graphic designer that TV shows and movies go to for period graphic design work. Like, every time I've worked on 1960s based TV show, and it was just the most fun, the most inspiring work I've ever done. And I think I have a knack for it. From working on shows like that, I've created a really diverse portfolio of work and assets that I feel like I can really pull into my design that will really pull those worlds together. And I would love to be the person that people call for that specific kind of design. So I really see myself doing that, and I would just be over the moon about that.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Until next time, we encourage you to continue nurturing your process. Farewell, and may all of your creative endeavors flourish. Could Be Pretty Cool News is a Could Be Pretty Cool original production that was workshopped as a part of the 2023 Google News Initiative Pre-Launch Lab. This episode was edited by Trinity Jackson. Our executive producer and host is Casey Willis, and our production coordinator is Liz Moore. The original theme music was composed by Camille Stennis, and our cover art was designed by Aaliyah Johnson. Special thanks to our guests. To find out more about them, you can visit our newsletter at couldbeprettycoolnews.substack.com. Thank you for listening.